Agatha Raisin and the Vanishing Blue-Eyed Alibi, dear listeners, welcome to tonight's mystery. I'm Jane, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you here for another captivating tale. Before we dive in, I'd love to get to know you a little better. What's one hobby or passion that brings you joy? Are you into baking, painting, gardening, or perhaps something completely unexpected? Drop your answer in the comments. I always enjoy learning more about our wonderful community. And do not forget to like and subscribe. It will motivate me for more mysteries every day. Now, let's get cozy and begin tonight's story. Chapter 1. The Quiet Morning and the Vanishing Visitor. The morning sun drifted lazily across the village of Carsely, turning the cobbled lane outside Agatha Raisin's cottage into a ribbon of pale gold. Inside, the air smelled faintly of toast and rose jam. Agatha sat by the window with her tea, its steam curling in the sunlight like something alive. For once the world seemed entirely at ease. No missing cats, no suspicious neighbours, and, most blessedly, no village committee meetings. Just the gentle sound of birds and the rustle of pages from her favourite scandal magazine. She read aloud, smirking at a headline about a television chef caught whipping up more than omelettes. Idiots, she muttered, sipping her tea. It was the kind of quiet morning she had earned, the kind that made her almost forget how chaos had a way of knocking on her door whenever she grew too comfortable. A soft knock came, barely audible over the hum of the kettle. Agatha frowned. Visitors this early were never a good sign. She adjusted her dressing gown, shuffled to the door, and opened it to find a young woman standing there, slim, pale, with wind-swept hair the colour of honey, and eyes darting nervously to either side. She clutched her handbag like it contained her entire life. "Mrs. Raisin?" the girl asked, voice trembling. "Yes," Agatha replied cautiously. "What is it?" "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman began, glancing down at her shoes. I was told you help people, discreetly." That piqued Agatha's interest. "Who told you that?" The woman hesitated, then shook her head. "Please, may I come in?" Agatha stepped aside, curiosity nudging aside her irritation. The stranger entered, glancing about as though expecting someone to leap from behind the curtains. Up close, Agatha noticed the faint shimmer of tears along the woman's lashes and the faintest trace of expensive perfume, jasmine, and something darker beneath it. "Sit down," Agatha said briskly. "You look as though you've seen a ghost. Tea?" The woman nodded, sinking into the floral armchair. "My name's Clara Benson, and I need your help." Agatha poured her tea carefully, watching her over the rim of the pot. "With what exactly?" Clara hesitated, twisting her fingers together. "It's about something that happened last night. They think I did something terrible, but I didn't. I swear I didn't." Her voice cracked on the last word. Agatha leaned forward slightly. "Who's they, dear?" "The villagers." "The police, everyone." Clara's gaze darted to the window. "I didn't steal anything." "I didn't hurt anyone. But I can't explain without—" She stopped, biting her lip. "I just need to prove I'm innocent before it's too late." Agatha's curiosity sharpened. "Before what's too late?" Clara didn't answer. She stood abruptly, knocking her teacup so that a drop splashed onto the carpet. "I shouldn't have come." "Nonsense," Agatha said, rising. "If you're in trouble, you've come to the right place." But Clara was already moving toward the door, clutching her handbag tighter. "I'm sorry. I thought I could, but it's not safe." "Not now? Safe from what?" Agatha demanded, following her to the threshold. Clara turned back, eyes wide with fear, lips parting as if to speak. Then she seemed to think better of it. "Please forget you saw me," she whispered. "And don't trust anyone with blue eyes." Before Agatha could respond, Clara darted down the path and vanished around the corner, her footsteps fading quickly on the cobblestones. For a long moment, Agatha stood in the open doorway, frowning at the morning air that still carried the faint trace of that perfume, floral, expensive, and oddly haunting. Then she noticed something glinting near the welcome mat. She bent down and picked it up. A single sapphire earring lay there, catching the sunlight in a flash of deep blue. Agatha turned it between her fingers, admiring its quality. "Not a trinket this, weigh it real stone, real gold." She looked down the lane where Clara had disappeared, then back at the earring. "Well," she murmured, closing the door behind her. So much for a quiet morning. She placed the earring on the table beside her teacup, where it caught the light like a watching eye. Something in her stirred, the familiar mix of irritation and excitement, the one that always meant her peace was over. Outside, the birds still sang, the sun still shone, and Carsely carried on as if nothing had changed. But Agatha knew better. Somewhere in that calm, a story was beginning, and she had just been pulled into it. The next morning dawned with the kind of crisp brightness that always put the villagers in a talkative mood. Agatha wrapped her scarf, tucked the sapphire earring into her coat pocket, and set off toward the high street. She told herself she was merely running errands, but the earring's cool weight reminded her that her curiosity was already in charge. Carsely was at its most charming on market mornings. Baskets of apples gleamed in front of the greengrocer's, and the scent of baked bread drifted from the bakery across the lane. Agatha's heels clicked on the cobbles as she approached the shop, nodding to a few neighbours who offered their usual mix of cheer and nosy interest. "Morning." "Mrs. Raisin," called Fred Jessup, the greengrocer, arranging a pile of pears with unnecessary flourish. "You're out early."
"Planning a fruit crumble?"
"Something like that," Agatha replied, selecting a few apples and eyeing him knowingly. "And what's new in the village this morning?"
"Anything scandalous?"
Fred chuckled. "Depends on what you call scandal. Heard there was a right row near the vicarage last night. Woke up half the lane, it did. Woman screaming, man shouting."
"Couldn't see much myself, but Sally from the post office said the fellow had eyes bluer than a gas flame." Agatha's fingers paused mid-reach.
"Blue eyes, you say?"
"That's what He lowered his voice with relish.
"And the lady, young, fair, looked like she'd been crying. Sound familiar, eh?" Agatha gave a non-committal shrug, though her mind was already racing. She handed over her coins, pocketing the apples, and made her way to the bakery, where gossip tended to ferment faster than dough. Inside, the air was thick with warmth and cinnamon. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Cartwright, who was never one to let facts spoil a good story. "Agatha, dear, you heard about the scene by the vicarage?" she began without greeting. "My cousin's husband's sister saw it from her window. Said the man looked dangerous, like the sort who smiles while lying. Dreadfully handsome, though." "Handsome men often are dreadful," Agatha replied dryly, ordering a scone she didn't really want. "Did anyone recognize the woman?" "Some think it was that new lodger from the old mill cottage. Pretty thing, always wearing perfume too fancy for a village girl." Mrs. Cartwright leaned forward, and she vanished right after. "Police were asking questions this morning." Agatha's pulse quickened. That had to be Clara. But what was she doing near the vicarage? And who was the man with the blue eyes? Leaving with her scone and a head full of questions, Agatha decided to drop by the vicarage itself. The path wound past blooming hedges, and the air carried the distant toll of church bells. She found Mrs. Bloxby, the vicar's wife, trimming roses by the gate. "Agatha?" Mrs. Bloxby smiled warmly. "I was just thinking of you. You look determined, which usually means trouble." "Not trouble," Agatha said, though her tone betrayed amusement. "I'm gathering information. Seems there was a disturbance last night. Blue-eyed stranger, frightened young woman. Ring any bells?" Mrs. Bloxby's pruning shears paused mid-air. "Ah, yes, I heard something of that sort. Mr. Trent, I believe his name was."
"A journalist staying at the inn?"
"Quite charming, but—" She hesitated, lowering her voice. "And there's something unsettled about him. And he's been seen speaking to that poor Clara Benson several times this week." Agatha feigned casual interest.
"Is that so?" "Indeed."
"People talk, of course. Some say he's here researching a book. Others think he's hiding from one." Mrs. Bloxby gave a knowing look.
"And Clara?"
"She looked frightened the last time I saw her. Said she'd made a terrible mistake." Agatha's gaze drifted toward the church tower, glinting against the pale sky. The village, so peaceful on the surface, suddenly felt full of whispers. She thanked Mrs. Bloxby and turned to leave. As she walked home, the sapphire earring in her pocket seemed to pulse with quiet meaning. Blue eyes, blue stone, coincidence or warning? She couldn't say yet. But the stillness of Carsely no longer felt calm. It felt expectant, as if the village itself were holding its breath. By the time she reached her garden gate, Agatha had made up her mind. Whatever this mystery was, it had already chosen her, and she intended to find out what secret shimmered behind those unforgettable blue eyes. Chapter 2. The Stranger by the Lake. The afternoon unfolded beneath a sky of quiet silver, the kind of soft English light that made the village lake shimmer like glass. Agatha, still restless from the morning's chatter, decided a walk might clear her head. She followed the winding path through the meadow, her boots brushing against dew-heavy grass. The air scented faintly of wild mint and distant smoke from someone's hearth. The lake appeared at the bend, serene, still, and framed by leaning willows. Ducks glided lazily across the water, ripples spreading in perfect circles. For a few moments, Agatha allowed herself to breathe in the calm. It reminded her why she had moved here in the first place. Peace, beauty, the illusion of order. Then movement caught her eye. A man stood near the water's edge, tall and neatly dressed in a dark coat that looked far too expensive for country wandering. He bent to pick up a smooth stone and flicked it across the lake. It skipped 3 times before sinking. Something in his posture, too deliberate, too controlled, made Agatha pause. When he turned, she saw them, eyes so sharply blue they almost startled her. The colour was cold and bright at once, like winter sunlight on ice. "Good afternoon," he said, with an easy smile, as though he'd been expecting her. "Afternoon," Agatha replied, studying him openly. "Lovely day for a walk, though I'd say you're dressed more for a London luncheon," he chuckled, straightening his coat. "Old habits. I suppose I haven't learned how to look properly rural yet." "Philip Trent," he extended a gloved hand. "Visiting journalist." "Agatha Raisin," she replied, shaking it briefly. "Permanent resident and amateur observer of suspicious goings-on." That earned a brief laugh, low and pleasant. Suspicious goings-on.
"I do hope I haven't stumbled into one." "Not yet," she said lightly,
though she noticed the faintest twitch in his smile, gone as quickly as it appeared. They began walking along the bank together, conversation polite but threaded with something unspoken. He asked about the village, its history, its people, the way gossip could travel faster than rain clouds.
Agatha in turn asked what brought him to Carsely. "Research," he said simply.
"I'm writing about rural journalism, how stories grow in small places." Agatha arched a brow. "And are you finding much to write about?" "Oh, you'd be surprised," he said, glancing toward the lake. "Every quiet village has its secrets. It's just a matter of where to look." A silence settled between them, the kind that hummed faintly with unspoken meaning. Agatha watched him flick another stone into the water, his movements precise. He struck her as a man rehearsed in every gesture. Finally, she said, "You must have met quite a few locals already."
"A young woman named Clara Benson."
The name broke the rhythm like a sudden gust of wind. Philip's hand froze mid-motion, the stone slipping from his grasp. It plopped into the lake with a dull splash. "Clara Benson?" he repeated softly. "Yes," Agatha said, keeping her tone neutral. "Pretty fair-haired, rather nervous. She came to me recently asking for help with some sort of misunderstanding." Philip's eyes shifted, their brightness darkening to something unreadable. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure," he said after a pause. "I'm afraid I'm not much for socializing." "That's so?"
Agatha asked.
"'Cause I hear you've been seen around the vicarage with someone who sounds very much like her." But the first time the charming veneer cracked.
A flicker of irritation crossed his face, gone before it fully formed.
"Village talk," he said smoothly. "Nothing more dangerous than that." "I wouldn't underestimate gossip," Agatha replied. "It's often sharper than it looks." He smiled faintly, but his eyes had lost their warmth. "You're quite the observer, Mrs. Raisin. I can see why people speak of you." "Do they?" "Oh, yes," he said, tone light again. "They say you have a knack for stirring still water." Before Agatha could reply, he checked his watch. "I'm afraid I must be going. Deadlines, you know." He turned toward the path with brisk precision. The conversation had ended, though Agatha hadn't dismissed him. She called after him, "If you do happen to see Clara, tell her I'm looking for her." He hesitated for the briefest instant, shoulders tightening. then continued walking, vanishing around the curve of the lake. The air seemed colder once he'd gone.
Agatha stood for a moment, staring at the water's calm surface, the circles from his last stone fading slowly into stillness.
Then something caught the light at her feet. She bent down and picked it up. A small matchbook, black leather cover embossed with faint gold letters, Trent House. Her lips curved into a knowing half-smile. "So much for small-town research," she murmured. Pocketing the matchbook, she cast one last glance at the empty path. The lake had returned to silence, but its reflection seemed deeper now, as if it, too, was hiding something beneath its smooth surface. By late afternoon, the mist had crept back into Carsely, softening the hedgerows and dulling the light that usually sparkled over Agatha's cottage garden. Inside, the air was far more cheerful. The kettle hummed, and the faint floral scent of Darjeeling tea filled the kitchen. Agatha set out 2 cups, a plate of shortbread, and a generous slice of lemon drizzle cake. Mrs. Bloxby arrived precisely on time, her shawl dusted with a fine sheen of drizzle. She carried the mild air of someone perpetually kind, yet quietly exasperated by the world's mischief.
Agatha adored her for that balance. "My dear Mrs. Raisin," she said, settling into the arm.
"You've been out walking again. You look positively charged with purpose, which usually means trouble." Agatha smirked, pouring tea.
"Not trouble, just curiosity. Met a new face by the lake."
"Philip Trent, journalist, or so he says." Mrs. Bloxby accepted her cup, but did not immediately sip. "Philip Trent," she repeated slowly, brows drawing together.
"That name sounds oddly familiar," Agatha leaned.
"I had the same feeling. He's charming, far too polished, and rather evasive when it comes to young Clara Benson." Mrs. Bloxby stirred her tea gently, the spoon clinking softly against porcelain. "Clara Benson. The girl who came to see you this morning?" "The very one." "She fled before I could get a word out of her." "Left behind a sapphire earring." Mrs. Bloxby's kind eyes darkened slightly.
"Agatha, I do hope you're not getting entangled again."
"Sometimes people's secrets are best left alone." "Oh, come now," Agatha said with a dismissive wave. "If everyone minded their own business, half of England's crimes would go unsolved." "Perhaps," Mrs. Bloxby said, a gentle smile curving her lips. "But peace is often a greater gift than truth." That remark didn't stop Agatha. She leaned closer.
"You said his name sounded familiar. Why?"
Mrs. Bloxby hesitated, setting her cup down. "It was some years ago when James and I were still in London. There was a minor scandal. A journalist accused of tampering with evidence in a financial fraud case. His name was Philip Trent. Nothing proven, but there was talk." Agatha felt a thrill, the familiar spark of intrigue pulsing through her veins. "So our polished lake visitor isn't just a casual wanderer. He's a man with history. Rumours," Mrs. Bloxby corrected softly. "And London ones at that. Best not to draw conclusions." Agatha pretended to agree, nodding absently while mentally cataloguing every detail. A journalist with a questionable past, a frightened young woman, a lost earring, and those piercing blue eyes. It was all too deliciously suspicious. Mrs. Bloxby watched her with quiet amusement. "You're planning to investigate, aren't you?" "Investigate is such a serious word," Agatha said, taking a deliberate sip of tea.
"I prefer verify, Agatha."
The vicar's wife sighed, shaking her head fondly. "You do attract these storms. Sometimes I think you'd chase lightning if it winked at you." Agatha laughed. "Only if it winked twice." The warmth of the fire and the rhythm of the rain lulled the room into a cosy stillness. Outside, the village lay wrapped in silver fog, the world reduced to faint shapes and echoes. When Mrs. Bloxby finally rose to leave, she squeezed Agatha's hand. "Be careful, dear. Curiosity is a fine companion, until it invites danger for tea." Agatha smiled. "Danger wouldn't dare show up uninvited."
"I always set the table myself." She watched her friend disappear down the lane, her shawl vanishing into the white haze.
The clock ticked gently in the quiet house. Agatha turned toward the window, drawn by a faint disturbance. Small impressions in the damp earth outside her garden gate. Footprints, fresh ones. She opened the door, the mist curling around her ankles like smoke. The footprints led a few paces down the path, then abruptly stopped, as if the walker had been swallowed by the fog. A shiver threaded down her spine. Agatha knelt, touching one of the prints. The edges were sharp, new. Whoever had been watching her had done so recently. She straightened slowly, scanning the thickening mist. Nothing but the whisper of wind and the faint clatter of a distant bicycle bell. Footprints that end in thin air, she murmured. Either Carsley's learned to levitate, or someone doesn't want to be found. Closing the gate behind her, she turned toward the fire. Her expression sharpened with resolve. If Philip Trent thought she'd let a mystery slide into the fog, he'd chosen the wrong village, and most certainly the wrong woman. Chapter 3. The Blue-Eyed Alibi. The following morning began with a knock sharp enough to wake every sparrow in Carsely.
Agatha, halfway through her first cup of coffee, muttered under her breath and shuffled to the door.
Standing there in uniform, rain on his cap, and an apologetic grin on his face, was Constable Bill Wong. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin," he said. "Mind if I come in? Bit of news, and I thought you'd hear it soon enough anyway." Agatha's interest perked instantly. "Come in, Bill. You know I thrive on early gossip." Inside, Bill removed his cap and warmed his hands over the stove. He looked unusually cautious, as if bracing for Agatha's reaction. "There's been a robbery at the jeweller's over in Morton," he began. "A sapphire pendant stolen last night. Delicate work, quite valuable." Agatha's brow lifted. "Sapphire, you say?"
How very coincidental.
"What's next? A matching earring, perhaps?" Bill gave her a knowing glance. "I was afraid you'd say that. The name Philip Trent ring a bell?"
Agatha crossed her arms.
"Only the man who can't seem to take a walk by the lake without stirring suspicion. What about him?" "He's our main person of interest. Claims he was nowhere near Morton when it happened. Says he was here in Carsely, with someone who can vouch for him." Bill paused. "A young woman named Clara Benson," Agatha blinked, setting her cup down with a clink. "Clara Benson? The same Clara who appeared at my door in a panic yesterday morning." Bill nodded. "So it seems. He told us they had dinner together at the Swan and Shepherd, but when we checked, no one remembered seeing them."
"And Clara?"
"She's disappeared," Agatha finished, her voice low but sharp. "Exactly. No one's seen her since yesterday afternoon. Her landlady says she packed a small bag and left without a word."
"And yet Trent insists she's his alibi. His blue-eyed alibi," Bill said, grimacing slightly at the phrase. Agatha gave a short, humourless laugh. "Poetic, isn't it?"
"He's got away with words." "And deceit." Bill shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Aggie, I'm not supposed to share every detail, but since I know how your mind works, maybe you can tell me what to make of it." He doesn't act nervous.
"Calm as you like."
"Keeps saying she'll turn up to clear him. Confidence is either the perfume of innocence or the cologne of guilt," Agatha mused. "What does your gut tell you?" Bill hesitated.
"That he's hiding something."
"But I can't tell if it's about the robbery or the girl." Agatha paced the kitchen, her slippers tapping the tiles. "Clara comes to me terrified. A day later she vanishes. Trent drops her name like a charm bracelet, thinking it'll buy him freedom. And the stolen item just happens to be sapphire, matching the earring she left behind."
"Oh, Bill, even the village hens could connect those dots." "Still," Bill said carefully, "we can't arrest a man on coincidence and a nice vocabulary."
"We've got no witnesses, no fingerprints."
"Only a missing woman and a convenient story." Agatha turned to him, eyes narrowing thoughtfully.
"And what about motive? Did the jeweller know Trent?"
"Not that we can tell."
"But there's talk Trent's been asking questions about old valuables, antiques, jewelry, that sort of thing. Said he was researching for a magazine article." Agatha smirked. "Research is often the polite word for reconnaissance." Bill sighed.
"I knew you'd say that. Of course you did."
"And I also know you came here hoping I'd keep out of it." He chuckled despite himself.
"Can't say I didn't try." Agatha's tone softened.
"You know I'll be careful. But this isn't just about a jewel theft. Clara came to me for help. Something scared her enough to run, and if Trent's lying about her, I'll find out why." Bill stood, putting his cap back on. "Just don't go poking around alone, all right? If you hear anything, call me first." Agatha nodded, though her eyes had already drifted toward the window, where a shaft of pale light pierced the clouds. the kind of light that revealed dust motes and secrets. As Bill left, she lingered at the door, arms folded. The phrase blue-eyed alibi rolled through her mind again, as glittering and false as a paste jewel. If Philip Trent thought charm could polish away guilt, he was mistaken. Somewhere out there, Clara Benson was hiding, or being hidden. Either way, Agatha Raisin intended to find her, even if she had to follow that sapphire trail all the way to the truth. The cottage at the edge of Carsely sat tucked behind a low hedge and a crooked gate, as if trying to keep its own secret.
Agatha pushed the latch with a gloved hand, the metal cold against her palm.
The garden was overgrown, winter jasmine spilling across the path, leaves damp and glistening. For a woman who had vanished overnight, Clara Benson had certainly left her mark of haste and worry behind. The front door wasn't locked.
Agatha hesitated only a second before stepping in.
The faint scent of lavender polish mixed with something else, perfume, familiar and lingering. She moved quietly, her heels making soft clicks on the wooden floorboards. The sitting room looked lived in but hurriedly abandoned. 2 teacups rested on the small oak table, one half full, the other drained. Steam no longer rose, but when Agatha brushed a finger against the porcelain, it was faintly warm. Left in a hurry, didn't you?
"Clara," she murmured. Books were stacked on the sideboard, one lying open face down as if mid-thought.
On the windowsill, a lace curtain fluttered inward through a half-open pane, letting in the smell of wet grass. Outside, the wind carried faint bird calls from the fields. Inside, the silence pressed close. Agatha took it all in with the methodical eye of someone trained by both curiosity and habit. Her gaze drifted toward the writing desk. A diary sat there, or rather, the remnant of one. Torn pages littered the floor like fallen leaves, jagged edges still in the spine. The remaining pages were blank. She bent down, picking up a scrap.
Only one word was legible, written in a looping, hurried hand. "Sorry." That single word tightened something in Agatha's chest.
"Sorry to whom?" she whispered. She checked drawers, cupboards, even the kitchen sink. No dishes stacked, no laundry waiting. All oddly tidy, except for the signs of flight. A small suitcase was missing from the corner near the bed, and a scarf had been left draped over the chair, its fringe brushing the floor. On the dresser, Agatha noticed something tucked behind a framed postcard. She drew it out carefully. A torn photograph. The edges were ripped unevenly, the paper creased as though once hidden, then hastily discarded. It showed Clara Benson smiling beneath a seaside pier, sunlight dancing in her hair. Beside her stood a familiar figure, Philip Trent, arm casually around her shoulder. That same effortless charm caught even in stillness. Beneath the picture, faded handwriting read, "Trent House, 2016. Agatha studied the photograph closely. The pier in the background looked weather-beaten, but the joy on Clara's face was genuine, almost radiant. Whatever bound them together, it wasn't just coincidence. She set the photo on the desk, her mind turning quickly. "Trent House," she said aloud.
Not just a name embossed on a matchbook there.
A place, maybe where it all began. The breeze from the open window lifted the edge of the curtain again, and for a moment Agatha thought she heard footsteps outside. She turned sharply, nothing but the rustle of leaves and a distant bark of a dog. Still, the uneasy prickle at the back of her neck remained. She walked through to the small back room. A lamp was still on, its bulb flickering weakly. On the bedside table sat a half-finished letter. Most of the page had been torn away, but at the bottom a few words remained. "If he finds out, I'll have to go." Agatha exhaled slowly. "Oh, Clara," she murmured, "what did you stumble into?" Gathering the torn pieces of diary and the photograph, she slipped them into her handbag. Whatever connection Clara and Philip once shared, it wasn't over, and Clara's disappearance might not have been entirely by choice. As she left the cottage, Agatha paused at the door. The wind pushed past her, carrying that same faint perfume, delicate, expensive, haunting.
It mingled with the damp scent of earth and moss,
leaving the air strangely heavy. She closed the door behind her, turning the key gently in its rusted lock, though she knew it was no protection against the kind of trouble already circling. The lane was quiet, the mist beginning to thicken again over the hedgerows. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled from the church tower, marking the hour with calm indifference. Agatha stood for a moment,
handbag clutched close, the photograph's edges pressing faintly through the lining.
The mystery had deepened, from gossip and guesses to something personal, secret, and far older than she'd expected. And as the fog rolled in, she couldn't help but feel that Clara Benson's story wasn't just one of fear, but of betrayal that had started long before either of them set foot in Carsely. Chapter 4. Secrets at Trent House. The road to Wickhaddon curved through rolling fields and shadowed lanes, the kind that made Agatha's small car hum like an insect against the vastness of the countryside. She hadn't visited the seaside town in years, not since a minor adventure involving a supposed ghost and an overzealous medium. But this time her errand was sharper, quieter, a search for truth behind a charming liar and a frightened woman who'd vanished into mist. By the time she reached the edge of Wickhaddon, clouds had gathered low over the horizon. The air smelled faintly of salt and old rain. Following a winding lane, she caught her first glimpse of Trent House, a grand Georgian manor perched on the rise above the cliffs, its pale stone facade streaked with time. The windows glimmered dully in the weak daylight, some shuttered, some yawning open like eyes that had forgotten to blink. Agatha parked at the gate and smoothed her coat. Her plan was simple: pose as a journalist, an excuse she found deliciously convenient.
After all, wasn't truth-gathering her special?
The gravel crunched beneath her boots as she approached the main door. A brass knocker shaped like a lion's head stared back at her, fierce yet tired. She gave it a decisive rap. Moments later, the door opened to reveal a woman in her 60s, thin as a spindle, with eyes that flicked quickly over Agatha's attire, taking in the tailored coat, the polite smile, the air of someone who didn't scare easily. "Yes," the woman said, her tone cautious. "Good afternoon," Agatha replied, her voice bright with charm. "Agatha Raisin. I'm writing a small feature on historical properties in the region, Trent House in particular."
I wondered if I might ask you a few questions.
The woman hesitated, glancing over her shoulder before stepping aside.
I'm Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper.
Not much history left worth writing about, if you ask me. But I suppose I can spare a few minutes. The entrance hall smelled faintly of polish and damp stone. Portraits lined the walls. Solemn faces, forgotten family members with stern gazes. A clock ticked somewhere in the distance, marking time that seemed slower here, heavier. Mrs. Finch led her toward the sitting room. "You said you're a journalist?"
"Freelance," Agatha said smoothly.
Fascinated by old places and the stories that cling to them. The housekeeper gave a small, wry smile. "Stories are all we've got left. This place used to belong to the Trent family, though no proper Trents live here now."
"Only visitors and caretakers?" Agatha tilted her head.
"Visitors?" Mrs. Finch's expression flickered. "Oh, some years back, a man and a woman stayed here for a spell. Rented the West Wing under false names. I didn't know at first, of course. They were polite, kept to themselves. But one evening there was shouting by the cliffs near the old boathouse. The woman ran inside crying. The man left the next morning. Never saw her again." Agatha's pulse quickened. "Did the man have blue eyes?" Mrs. Finch's brow creased. "You know, yes.
"Striking ones."
Like bits of sky trapped in glass, unsettling. And the woman? Pretty thing, nervous, always looking over her shoulder. The sort who'd had her heart broken and didn't know where to hide it." Agatha studied the dust motes floating in the grey light.
"And you never learned their real names?"
Mrs. Finch shook her head. "No, but a few weeks later a letter came addressed to Miss Benson, returned to sender." Agatha exhaled softly. The name connected everything. The seaside photo, the perfume, the fear. Outside, a distant gull cried, its sound thin against the wind. Agatha turned toward the tall window, gazing past the manicured lawn toward the cliffs beyond. The sea rolled far below, restless and glittering, gnawing at the rocks like a secret, unwilling to stay buried. Mrs. Finch followed her gaze. People say that's where they argued that night. The blue-eyed man and the woman with a secret. Some say she fell. Some say she left.
Either way, the house hasn't been the same since. Agatha turned back, her expression steady.
Houses rarely forget what people try to erase. Mrs. Finch's face softened. You sound like someone who's seen her share of erasing. Perhaps, Agatha replied with a faint smile. But I've also seen what's left behind, and it's rarely the truth people think it is. As she stepped back into the wind, the sky broke open into streaks of pale gold and iron grey. The manor loomed behind her, windows staring out to sea, and for the first time that day, Agatha felt the past pressing close, not as memory, but as warning. The study at Trent House smelled of old paper and polished oak, a quiet heaviness that pressed against the ears and made footsteps sound louder than they were.
Agatha edged the door open, holding her breath as the hinges groaned faintly.
The room was lined with tall shelves, thick with dusty tomes, ledgers, and scattered correspondence. Sunlight filtered through heavy drapes, catching motes of dust like tiny floating secrets. She moved slowly, scanning the shelves for anything out of place. A leather-bound ledger caught her eye, half hidden beneath a stack of brittle letters. Sliding it onto the desk, she flipped through carefully. Among mundane accounts and estate inventories, a series of letters stood out. Ink slightly faded, language formal but urgent. They referenced jewelry shipments, coded notes about deliveries, and payments made under different names. One letter, in particular, was signed simply, see Agatha's pulse quickened.
See, Clara?
She whispered. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, unmistakably feminine. Whoever C was, she had been deeply involved in the affairs of Trent House, and possibly in more than just hiding from Philip Trent. A sudden noise made her freeze, the soft scrape of a shoe against floorboards. The study door rattled.
Someone was here. Agatha's mind raced.
Whoever it was, they were searching too, and she wasn't meant to be found. Heart pounding with controlled urgency, she slipped the letter into her coat pocket. She could leave the rest for later. Quietly, she edged toward the desk's corner, moving into the shadows where the light from the window barely reached. The figure, tall, shadowed, indiscernible, lingered near the doorway.
Moving with deliberate caution, Agatha counted silently, careful to keep her breathing steady.
Another step, another pause. Then, just as the intruder leaned toward the shelves, she pivoted silently and slipped out behind a velvet curtain, keeping to the darkest part of the room. The study door opened wider, letting in a thin slice of light that caught the edge of her coat. She froze, then, as if by instinct, moved past the intruder's line of sight, low and swift, until she reached the side exit. The air smelled of sea and wet stone as she slipped into the corridor beyond, careful not to disturb a single artifact. Once the door clicked shut behind her, Agatha allowed herself a quiet breath, sliding the letter out from her pocket to examine it again. Each word confirmed something she had long suspected. Clara Benson was no ordinary frightened girl. She had knowledge, perhaps leverage, and a connection to Trent House, far deeper than appearances suggested. The shadows in the study receded as she leaned against the cold wall, savouring the thrill of discovery without. The letter, safe in her possession, was proof, a clue that could unravel motives, connections, and the missing pieces in a puzzle that stretched from Carsely to Wickhaddon. Agatha's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. The manor might hold many secrets, but she was already a step ahead. One letter, one signature, one faint trace of truth, and she was ready to follow it wherever it led. Chapter 5. Whispers by Candlelight. The note arrived pinned to Agatha's garden gate that evening, sealed with a smear of dark wax. Meet me at the churchyard. Midnight. There is much to explain. The handwriting was elegant yet hurried, and her pulse quickened with a mixture of excitement and caution. By the time she reached the old stone church, The moon was a silver crescent casting pale light over the gravestones and hedges slick with evening dew. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and incense from a service long past. Agatha's footsteps were muffled by the soft grass, yet every sound felt amplified in the quiet. At the far end of the yard, a figure waited beneath a twisted yew tree. His coat flapped lightly in the night breeze, and when he turned, those same piercing blue eyes met hers. Philip Trent. For a moment the tension between them was almost tangible, as if the night itself held its breath. "Mrs. Raisin," he said, his voice low, tinged with something like relief and urgency. "I didn't know who else I could trust." "You could have sent a telegram," Agatha replied, her tone light but sharp, "or whispered through a keyhole. Instead, you chose the cemetery." Philip offered a wry half-smile. "Subtlety is overrated. We have little time." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Clara, she didn't simply run. She vanished after a plan went awry. She was trying to expose the smuggling operation connected to Trent House. I was involved, though I never intended harm."
"I thought she'd manage, but..." A crunch of leaves interrupted. Agatha tensed, eyes scanning the shadow. Footsteps. Someone approached, careful but deliberate. Philip's gaze darted to the path beyond the yew.
"They've found us," he muttered. Before she could ask who, he pivoted, coat swirling, and disappeared into the darkness between gravestones. The sound of his boots fading against the damp grass echoed in Agatha's ears. The footsteps grew nearer, rhythmic and deliberate.
Agatha ducked behind a low tombstone, heart racing but measured.
A tall figure passed, cloaked in shadow, lingering for only a moment before continuing down the narrow path. The wind carried faint echoes of whispered words, too muffled to understand. When the sound subsided, Agatha exhaled, steadying herself against the stone. Philip's words, partial as they were, rang clearly in her mind. Clara had tried to act, to expose the crimes hidden beneath Trent House's elegant facade, and Philip had been there, tangled in the consequences. She drew the letter from her pocket again, the wax seal still firm. Each word felt heavier now, layered with meaning beyond a simple invitation. The flicker of moonlight across the stones seemed to mirror the fragility of trust, a dance between revelation and concealment. Agatha stepped carefully out from behind the tombstone, scanning the churchyard once more. The mist curled at the edges of the path, and the silence pressed close. Her mind worked rapidly. Who had found them, and how much had they overheard? With one last glance at the shadows where Philip had disappeared, she turned back toward the lane leading home. The candlelight from her window flickered faintly through the fog, a small, steadfast signal in the night. Clutching the letter, Agatha felt a mix of anticipation and unease. The meeting had offered answers, yes, but only partial ones. The real story, Clara's fate, the extent of the smuggling operation, and Philip's true motives remained shrouded, waiting for her to follow wherever it led. Agatha returned to her cottage just as the fog began curling around the hedges like slow, deliberate fingers. The door clicked shut behind her, and for a moment the familiar warmth of home, the scent of brewing tea and polished wood, offered a fragile comfort. Her cat, Mr. Whiskers, prowled around her ankles, tail twitching with suspicion. "Quiet night, isn't it?" she murmured, dropping her coat. Mr. Whiskers hissed sharply and leapt back, arching his back toward the corner of the room.
Agatha followed his gaze and froze.
A loose floorboard near the hearth had shifted slightly, as though it had been recently disturbed. Kneeling, she pressed lightly with her hand, revealing a small hollow beneath. Heart quickening, she reached inside and withdrew a worn, leather-bound diary. Its edges were frayed, the cover soft from handling. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Clara Benson's neat, precise script, now tinged with fear. Settling into her armchair, Agatha opened the diary carefully. The first entries were familiar: anxiety over village gossip, minor worries about errands and encounters. But soon the tone darkened. Clara wrote of secret meetings at Trent House, of whispered threats, and of Philip Trent's charm that masked something colder. One entry caught Agatha's eye. "I fear that the one with blue eyes lies twice. Trust no outward smile. Protect yourself." The words pulsed with both dread and determination. Agatha read on, each page more urgent than the last. Clara described planning to expose the jewelry smuggling operation, her fear growing as she realized how deeply Philip had woven himself into the network. Names were left out, details obscured, but the sense of panic and the careful measures to protect herself was palpable. The final page was smeared, as though tears or haste had destroyed part of the text. Edges were torn, corners folded, leaving only fragments.
"Cannot alone. If he—" Agatha's mind raced.
The diary's incomplete ending mirrored Clara's sudden disappearance, an unfinished story waiting for resolution. She traced her finger over the words she could read. "The one with blue eyes lies twice," she whispered. Her mind churned through all the possibilities. Was Philip deceiving her? Was Clara's disappearance voluntary or forced? And what had been torn from the final page to keep others from knowing the truth? Mr. Whiskers leapt onto her lap, nudging her gently as though sensing the weight of discovery.
Agatha scratched behind his ears absently, but her eyes never left the diary.
It was more than paper. It was a bridge into Clara's mind, a direct line to her fear, her cleverness, and her desperation. Agatha carefully closed the diary and slipped it into her handbag, resolving to guard it as if it were a treasure. The cottage felt quieter now, the ordinary domestic safety contrasting sharply with the danger hidden in those pages. She could feel the threads of the mystery pulling taut, winding through people, places, and secrets yet uncovered. Settling near the window, she watched the fog deepen over Carsely. The diary had given her a clue, a warning, but also a responsibility. Somewhere out there, Clara Benson's story waited to be finished, and Agatha Raisin had just been handed the pen. Chapter 6. The Garden Clue. The morning was crisp, sunlight spilling in thin gold strips across the garden path. Agatha moved slowly among the roses, snipping dead stems and inhaling the faint perfume of early blooms. The quiet of Carsely wrapped around her like a soft shawl, and for a while, the troubles of Trent House, Philip Trent, and the missing Clara Benson felt distant, as if tucked behind a veil of ivy and petals. She paused at the centre of the garden, kneeling to inspect a particularly stubborn rosebush. Her fingers pricked on thorns as she gently tugged away a tangling branch. And then something unusual caught her eye. A small scrap of blue silk caught in the thorns, shimmering faintly in the morning light. Agatha froze. The colour, the texture. It matched Clara's dress from the photograph she had discovered in the cottage. Her pulse quickened. Slowly, she freed the fabric, letting it rest in her palm. The silk was damp, and when she lifted it closer, a faint scent of brine lingered on the threads. Her mind raced. The Wickhaddon Cliffs, the seaside pier, the wind whipping around the stone manor.
A realization pressed in. Clara might never have left that coastline alive. Impossible, she whispered to herself, her voice barely above the rustle of leaves.
Yet the silk
and the salt.
Later that afternoon, Agatha called Constable Bill Wong to examine the find. Bill arrived promptly, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. Kneeling beside the rosebush, he carefully took the silk, examining it under the light. "Well," he said, after a moment, "that's definitely sea salt. Not the sort you'd find from washing hands or from a storm passing through Carsely." Agatha nodded, eyes narrowed. So she was near the cliffs, not merely a passing visitor.
And someone brought her back here, or she didn't make it home. Bill's jaw tightened.
We've got to consider that she might have come to harm, or at least been very close to it. The weight of the thought settled on Agatha like dew on the garden leaves. For the first time, the village's cosy tranquility felt fragile, almost illusionary. The roses swayed lightly in the breeze, their blooms unaware of the darkness trailing from distant cliffs. Agatha's mind worked fast, connecting threads she had been ignoring. The torn diary, the letters from Trent House, Philip's evasions. Each piece formed a map of fear, secrecy, and betrayal. The silk in her hand wasn't merely fabric. It was a message, a tangible link to Clara's last known movements. "I need to see those cliffs for myself," Agatha murmured, speaking as much to herself as to Bill. If Clara went there, if she fell or was forced. Her voice faltered slightly, the thought chilling. Bill placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Careful, Aggie, the cliffs aren't forgiving. But I'll go with you. No need to take unnecessary risks alone." Agatha smiled faintly, grateful for his presence, yet inwardly restless. The rose garden, once a place of comfort and routine, had turned into a reminder of how closely beauty and danger could intertwine. Holding the blue silk in her fingers, she traced the delicate weave.
Imagining the girl who had worn it, fearful, clever, desperate.
Clara Benson's story had taken a darker turn than she had expected, and for the first time,
Agatha felt the chill of mortality brush against her normally fearless curiosity. The roses swayed again in the wind,
whispering secrets that only the observant could interpret. Agatha pressed the silk to her cheek briefly, then carefully folded it and tucked it into her coat pocket. Every fibre of it carried a clue and a warning that she could not ignore. Agatha had barely returned inside from the rosebush when a sharp knock echoed through the cottage. Startled, she set down her garden shears and opened the door to reveal Philip Trent. Coat damp from drizzle, eyes darting nervously over his shoulder. "Mrs. Raisin," he began, voice low and urgent. "I didn't know where else to go. They're following me. I think someone knows I've been asking questions." Agatha stepped aside, letting him in, though her instincts were wary. "Followed by whom?" she asked, eyes narrowing slightly. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I need you to trust me. You've seen more than anyone else. I'm tangled in this mess, and I can't sort it without your help." Agatha motioned toward the sitting room. "Sit, tell me everything."
"But be aware, Philip. I've seen more than my fair share of charming lies." Philip sank into the armchair, running a hand through his damp hair. "I know. That's why I came here. Clara."
She didn't disappear for no reason. The smuggling ring, it's bigger than I realized. I've been trying to protect her, and perhaps myself as well. Agatha's eyes narrowed. Protect her or protect you? Because I now have her diary and the silk from your cliffside escapades.
"I'm trying to figure out whose story I can trust." Philip's jaw tightened. "I never wanted her hurt. I never wanted. Then why leave?"
Agatha pressed, stepping closer. "Why not tell me everything before I had to find these clues myself?" He flinched, expression hardening. The easy charm that had accompanied him by the lake vanished, replaced by something taut and defensive. Because some things can't be explained without risking lives. "You don't understand yet." The tension thickened, the cottage seeming smaller, shadows deeper. Agatha kept her gaze fixed on him, weighing each word, each hesitation. "You've left pieces of Clara behind. The diary, the silk, now you. All these fragments. But you're careful to leave questions, not answers." Philip exhaled sharply, rising.
"I can't stay."
"I've already risked too much by coming here." Before she could respond, he slipped past her toward the door. She moved quickly, but he had already crossed the threshold. Then her sharp eyes caught something on the floor, gleaming faintly in the soft light, a silver cufflink engraved with the initials P.T. She bent down, lifting it carefully. Her mind raced. Deliberate gift?
Or warning?
Was it a bridge to trust, a plea for understanding, or a subtle threat? The monogram seemed almost intimate, a token too personal to be random. Yet the timing, the sudden departure, all hinted at manipulation. Agatha turned it over in her hand, feeling its weight. It was a small object, but it carried a heavy question. Could Philip Trent be trusted, or was she now part of a game whose rules she didn't yet know? The drizzle tapped gently against the windows, the garden outside misted with lingering fog.
Agatha pocketed the cufflink carefully, mind buzzing.
One thing was certain. The threads of truth, lies, and half-truths were tangled tighter than ever, and she would need all her wits to unravel them. Chapter 7. Beneath the blue veil. Dawn arrived over Wycadden with a cool silver light, spilling across the cliffs and the restless sea below. Agatha parked her car at the edge of the coastal lane and pulled her coat tightly around her, the wind biting at her cheeks. The path down to the cliffside was narrow, winding between gorse and weathered stone, and every step crunched softly against pebbles damp with overnight mist. She paused at the first bend, scanning the jagged edge where the waves hit the rocks below. Her eyes flicked to the ground, noting small scuffs and broken twigs, footprints of someone small and hurried, perhaps a woman in distress. The scent of wet salt and faint perfume lingered in the air, subtle yet unmistakable, curling around her senses like a memory she could almost touch. Agatha pressed forward carefully, keeping her gaze on the narrow cliffside path. Then, near a jutting rock outcrop, her eyes caught a flash of blue snagged among the thorny shrubs. Kneeling, she reached for it and carefully freed the fragment of delicate veil, the fabric soft and trembling in her fingers. It was unmistakably the same hue as the silk from her garden, and likely the same one Clara had worn. The discovery made her pulse quicken. Someone had been here, and not merely for the view. The veil, the salt, the perfume, each clue knit together a story both fragile and urgent. Agatha's eyes swept the cliff edge, imagining the events that might have unfolded here under the moonlight, when shadows and fear would have cloaked the truth. A sudden voice called from below, hesitant but firm.
"Excuse me, miss." Agatha turned to see a wiry fisherman emerging from the mist, leaning on his oar.
His coat smelled of brine and wet rope.
"I saw something that night."
Or someone. Agatha's heart quickened.
"A man?"
she asked softly. The fisherman nodded, wringing his hands. Blue eyes, tall fellow.
"Arguing with a young woman near the cliffside."
Didn't see the end. The night was dark, mist thick.
"But they were shouting, voices fierce. She ran."
Then he left. Agatha absorbed the words, nodding slowly. The fragment of veil in her hand trembled faintly. "Did anyone else see him?" "Not that I know of," he admitted, looking uneasy. "No one comes out here after dark. Folks say the cliffs are dangerous." That night, only me and the gulls. The truth was fragmentary, but enough to confirm what her instincts had long suspected. Clara had confronted someone she knew, someone with blue eyes, at the cliffs, and something had gone terribly wrong. The details remained incomplete, but the pieces were aligning, the story slowly emerging from shadow into clarity. Agatha held the veil to her cheek, inhaling faint traces of perfume, a reminder of the girl she sought and the peril she had faced. The morning wind tugged at her hair, carrying the sound of waves crashing far below, echoing against the jagged rocks like whispers of events that had been witnessed but not understood. As she stood, scanning the cliffs and horizon, Agatha felt the weight of evidence settle in her mind. The blue-eyed man, the missing girl, the stolen jewelry, all threads in a tangled web that had been stitched across time, place, and secrecy. Each clue she uncovered brought her closer to the truth, yet left enough uncertainty to keep her cautious. With one last glance at the veil snagged on the rocks, Agatha pocketed it carefully. The cliffs had revealed part of their story, but the resolution, the confrontation, the confession, the ultimate revelation still lay ahead. She turned back toward the path, heart steady, mind alert, determined to follow the trail wherever it led. Agatha had just adjusted the fragile fragment of blue veil in her pocket when a shadow shifted along the cliff edge. She turned sharply, heart skipping, to see Philip Trent stepping from behind a crag, coat damp, eyes wide with desperation. The wind tugged at his hair, carrying the scent of salt and storm, and in that moment he seemed smaller than the imposing cliffs around them. "Agatha," he gasped, voice trembling against the roar of the waves below.
"I need to tell you." "Everything?" Her eyes narrowed. "Everything, Philip?"
"I've been following threads, piecing together fragments. If you value your explanation, speak clearly." And quickly, he drew a deep breath, glancing once at the jagged rocks below. "Clara, She discovered what I was involved in.
The smuggling.
She tried to protect me. She wanted to stop it, but she didn't want me caught.
I didn't mean for anything to happen, truly. Agatha's stomach tightened. And yet something did happen. Philip swallowed, gaze dropping to the waves churning below. In panic, she confronted me by the cliffs. I tried to stop her from running. I didn't think, and she fell. I never meant to. I swear. His voice broke. Agatha's hands clenched at her sides, the wind whipping at her coat.
The fragments of veil in her pocket seemed heavier than before, a tactile echo of Clara's peril. She searched Philip's eyes, hoping for some hint of deceit, some subtle manipulation, but found only raw fear and regret. I
have to go, he said suddenly, glancing toward the precipice. They're coming. I can't stay. I'll face this. Alone. Before she could protest, he stepped closer to the edge. Agatha's voice caught in her throat. Philip, wait.
But the wind took him, a sudden rush of air and the sound of boots slipping on gravel. He tumbled over the cliffside, disappearing into the mist and surf below. For a heartbeat, Agatha stood frozen, the echoes of his confession colliding with the roar of the sea. The only sound was the relentless crash of waves against the rocks, as if the cliffs themselves had swallowed him into silence. Agatha pressed her palms to her face, breathing in the salt-heavy air, trying to ground herself in the weight of what she had just witnessed. At last, she lowered her hands, staring out over the jagged coastline. Clara's fall, Philip's desperation, the smuggling, the lies and confessions, it all settled around her like a bitter tide. Justice, accidental or otherwise, had come in the form of truth laid bare. Agatha turned away from the cliff edge slowly, careful not to disturb the stones underfoot. The veil fragment in her pocket reminded her of the girl she had sought, the secrets she had uncovered, and the fragile balance of human choice and fate. No words followed. Silence, thick and almost reverent, wrapped the cliffs. Agatha walked back along the path, letting the wind carry the sound of the waves, the cries of gulls, and the weight of confessions that could not be undone. The story of Clara Benson and Philip Trent had reached its painful, inevitable truth. Chapter 8. Tea, Truth, and Blue Skies. The morning sun spilled golden light across Agatha's garden, illuminating roses, lavender, and the neat rows of herb beds she tended with quiet devotion. Birds chirped lazily, flitting between branches, and the air smelled faintly of earth warmed by sun and dew. Agatha moved among her plants with careful attention, snipping a wayward stem here, adjusting a support there, letting the rhythm of routine soothe her mind. The events of the past weeks lingered like a shadow beneath her consciousness. Clara's disappearance, Philip's confession, the cliffs, the smuggling, the veil of intrigue. And yet, in this moment, the village felt safe again, the tension dissolved into ordinary life, punctuated by the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional hum of a passing bee. A soft voice broke her reverie. "Morning, Agatha." Constable Bill Wong stood at the garden gate, hat in hand, his expression warm but thoughtful. He stepped forward carrying a small tin of biscuits. "I wanted to thank you," he said, placing them on the garden bench, "for everything. For your eyes, your wit, your courage. You helped untangle a mess that could have grown far worse." Agatha smiled faintly, brushing soil from her hands. "It was a tangled web, yes, but someone had to follow the threads."
"I just happened to have a taste for detail and a little curiosity," Bill chuckled.
"Curiosity indeed. Though I sometimes worry it leads you into trouble." She gave him a teasing look. "Trouble is often unavoidable when the truth is waiting, but it's comforting to see familiar faces when it arrives." As they spoke, Mrs. Bloxby appeared at the gate, basket in hand. Her eyes crinkled warmly, her presence a gentle reminder of the village's steady rhythm. "Morning, Agatha."
"Fresh scone."
"There's something grounding about tea, you know, especially after all this."
"Excitement?" Agatha nodded, letting the words sink in.
She watched the sunlight catch the petals of the roses, the blue sky stretching above with a clarity that felt almost symbolic, a renewal after the storm. The garden had survived, just as the village had, and life continued, quiet yet persistent. Mrs. Blocksby leaned closer, her voice soft but firm.
Mysteries, dear, never truly end.
They settle into corners of memory, whispering only when curiosity awakens. You've done well to see this one through, but remember, the peace you feel now is a gift, not a guarantee. Agatha considered the wisdom, her gaze moving across the garden. Every bloom, every swaying herb was a reminder of care, patience, and attention, the same qualities that had guided her through the shadowed weeks. She breathed deeply, letting the warmth of sun, soil, and companionship fill her chest. Bill offered a nod, and Mrs. Blocksby smiled knowingly. The village hummed gently around them, the distant chiming of a bell marking the passing of time, unhurried and serene. Agatha felt the tension ease fully from her shoulders. Sitting on the garden bench with a cup of tea in hand, she allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The blue sky above mirrored the calm she felt inside. Clarity, understanding, and the comforting knowledge that life, though never without mysteries, had a way of finding equilibrium. As the wind rustled through the leaves and the first sips of warm tea met her lips, Agatha Raisin let herself rest in the simple, enduring joy of the ordinary: garden, sun, tea, and the subtle assurance that curiosity, courage, and care could carry her through even the most tangled of stories. Later that afternoon, as the garden basked in the warmth of late spring sun, a soft tap at the door announced the postman's arrival. Agatha wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door to find a single envelope resting on the threshold. Its pale cream paper was unremarkable, except for the deep blue wax seal, pressed with an emblem she instantly recognized: the color of the veil, the silk, the motif that had threaded through every step of the mystery. She picked it up carefully, her fingers tracing the edge of the seal before breaking it. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, Clara's handwriting unmistakable, neat, deliberate, and carrying the faint scent of the perfume that had lingered on the cliffs. Agatha, if you are reading this, then the events have unfolded as they must.
I forgive Philip. He acted in panic, not malice.
And though my path ends here, I ask you to continue seeking truth, not proof. Facts may mislead, but understanding never does. Be patient, be careful, and trust in the quiet intuition that has guided you this far. There are others in need of clarity, and you have the courage to provide it. Yours, in honesty and hope, C. Agatha held the note to her chest, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. The words were simple, yet profound, a final gift from the girl she had sought through shadows, cliffs, and stolen moments. Clara's voice, though absent from the world, reached her with clarity, forgiveness, and purpose. She walked slowly into the garden, the letter held lightly in one hand, and set herself on the familiar bench. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, and the sunlight warmed her shoulders. Each detail of the day, the soft bird calls, the distant hum of the village, the subtle fragrance of herbs, felt heightened, infused with a sense of calm resolution. Agatha read the note again, savouring the phrasing, the gentle insistence on wisdom over proof. The smuggling, the cliffs, the vanished girl, the blue-eyed man, all had reached their conclusion, yet not in a way of vengeance or punishment. Instead, clarity and understanding remained, wrapped in a quiet moral equilibrium. Mr. Whiskers leapt onto the bench beside her, nudging her hand as though sensing her relief. Agatha stroked his fur absently, eyes lifted toward the clear blue sky above. The motif of blue, silk, veil, eyes, seal, now felt like a cycle completed, a symbolic arc that had carried them from mystery to understanding. She tucked the letter into her coat pocket for safekeeping, letting the words linger in her mind. The village around her hummed with gentle life, the kind that survived storms and secrets alike. For the first time in weeks, Agatha felt a deep, untroubled satisfaction, a rare serenity earned through curiosity, courage and compassion. Rising, she stretched lightly, inhaling the garden's fragrant air. Somewhere in the distance, children's laughter drifted faintly, blending with the rustle of leaves. The mystery had ended, yet its lessons remained: patience, insight, and the gentle art of observing without rushing. Agatha Raisin leaned back, letting the sun warm her face, and allowed herself the simple joy of presence, of truth revealed, and of quiet skies stretching endlessly above.